Now we're looking at a special session. You've probably seen Saslaw wants statewide tax increases. He wants regional taxes in addition. But unless he gets his full statewide tax increase package, he says he's going to take nothing. Some of the House leadership appears to want to reinstate 3202 in the form it was in during the General Assembly session, which would allow the local governments in Northern Virginia to decide whether they participate in the NVTA, and it would have this sort of funky voting arrangement in the Hampton Roads area where 1/7 of the 12 localities voted to participate, they'd all be in, whether they voted for it or not. Now, I have a much worse problem with that, because if you're in one of those 5 that doesn't vote for it, and I will tell you, of the 12, there are 6 north of the river and 6 south. Of the 6 north of the river, 5 want out. So you literally could have a 7-5 vote where all of the localities below the river vote in, and one, Williamsburg, north of the river, votes in, and all of the others north of the river will be in. And the project.
How did I know it was Williamsburg?
And the project list includes only one thing north of the river. And most of the people down there say that none of these go to the worst congestion problems in the area. It's the peanut butter plan. You spread it out, and so everybody gets a little something. And so you can stand on the map and hold your arms out, and within 5 miles of any direction, you can find a project and say, "Hey, this thing right near you will get funded. Just vote for this, massive tax increase." So that is also problematic. I think that we should take the opportunity of a special session, and I think there should be one. I do not agree with the governor that you just wait for some compromise to emerge. I'm a litigator, and I know what deadlines do to people. It also helps to have everybody in the same room. I think this is an opportunity to completely rethink our transportation system. The notion that broad-based taxes will ever, completely separate from the free market, build enough roads, enough transit to the extent that's appropriate, and maintain them is foolishness. And we keep proving it. And you've all heard that statement, the definition of insanity is doing something that fails over and over. Well, that's what we've been doing. The 1986 sales tax increase was 4 years after Chuck Robb's gas tax increase, and 3 years later, Belial's came back for more. It doesn't work. We need to connect the cost of using the resource, the road, to who pays for it. We need to guarantee that money stays there. We need to move to a user fee approach, and in my view, we need to combine local responsibility for land use with local responsibility for local roads. The state shouldn't be responsible for roads that it has no control over, the NIMBY-style development that may go on in one place or another. Now, along with that, I don't want to pass on a mandate. I think the local governments who are given responsibility for that portion of the road network should get the money that now goes to finance that portion of the road network. You don't give responsibility without authority. I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think it's conservative. But until an elected body, therefore an accountable body, is responsible for both land use and transportation, at least to some degree, we can do all the little dances we want about VDOT reports when a zoning change gets made or whatever. Our free market experience tells us that until those responsibilities and consequences are combined in one place that's accountable to the people, we are not going to see a change in the problem we have with how development is not adequately connected to transportation. Our founding fathers were brilliant in that they understood human nature, and they created a system not that ignored human nature, but that accounted for it. That's why we have checks and balances. It's why we have a system that has worked as well as it has, never perfectly, but as well as it has for as long as it has. And we need to not ignore, as liberals so often want to do, human nature. They want to pretend you can build a utopia by mandating it from government. And you can't do that. Human beings don't respond to that. However, I do think there are alternatives where we can connect our land use and our transportation and our financing that stops the tax increase train, that also connects the use of our roads and transportation systems in such a way that we can actually sustain it. Yeah.
I was just wondering one thing, and I'm not trying to give these people excuses, but was the reason that there wasn't transportation money in the budget in any way connected to the fact that the transportation authorities got jumped at the last minute?
Well, it certainly was a lot more difficult because of the decision at the last moment, yes. The House wouldn't have done anything. Saslaw, of course, put a gas tax bill through. And he's always been a fan of the gas tax. But the House wasn't going to do anything as long as they had last year's solution still functioning. But the fact that it came with a week to go, when the budget had just gone into conference the day before, really, I mean, I would have trusted the conferees to, well, you guys just rewrite the budget. I'm sure it'll all work out just fine. You know, that's not something I'm terribly comfortable with, and that's not with any disrespect to most of the individual conferees, but that's a horrible system. And when that budget comes out, we have a half hour to get a briefing on it and vote. And if you're going to, and I believe, and if they were going to do that, it would have just been a rejiggering of numbers. And I believe we need a fundamental change to our transportation system, or we're going to keep coming back to this every 5 years, every 6 years. And what we're going to hear on the other side is, if you don't want to increase taxes, you want to shut down business in Virginia. You want to keep families from getting together and getting to the ball game and doing all those kinds of things. And that's just baloney. But we're either going to keep fighting that fight as a rearguard action, or we're actually going to change our transportation system in such a way that we accommodate human nature and the needs of our society as it exists today. And we need to rely on what works. The free market works. Let's let the free market work. I don't know why people don't think the supply and demand curve applies to this particular resource, being transportation. It applies everywhere else. Gravity applies, just like it applies everywhere else, and so does the law of supply and demand. And we need to harness that for our benefit. Just a couple of other quick notes. Gun legislation. The most annoying element here was that we got Jill Vogel's bill out that allowed non-licensed concealed carriers who were legal, law-abiding citizens who could have a gun to transport it by locking it in a glove compartment or something in the car, in your middle console. So it's not immediately available, but it's obviously concealed, and they don't have a concealed carry permit, so there's an issue there. But the alternative is to leave the gun on your seat, or to put it in your trunk. And if the idea is to find a middle ground between availability and putting it in your trunk, Jill found an excellent compromise. It got 31 votes out of 40 when it went through the Senate. And and Kane vetoed it, and 6 Democrats flipped to uphold his veto. 6, including supposedly pro-gun Chap Peterson. Who else? Phil Puckett. I don't know what happened to Phil Puckett this session. He also voted against the Planned Parenthood defunding amendment on the budget. And Phil is, for those of you who don't know, had been 100% pro-life Democrat. Not anymore. He'd also been, as far as I recall, 100% pro-gun. And I mean, he represents the Appalachia section of Virginia, down in Southwest Virginia. There is no reason for him to take a bad gun vote like that. And maybe he thinks he's totally safe in that district, so it's okay to betray the Second Amendment and those supporters and support the governor. And maybe he got some brownie points with the governor on that. I don't know.
Give a man a gavel, and he'll do some weird things.
But it's those were surprises in that area. There were other people who weren't so surprising when they flipped, but those two were.